The defense resumed its cross-examination of former Trump attorney Michael Cohen, with attorney Todd Blanche even accusing him of lying on the stand.
We have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that the committees get responses to their legitimate requests. But this is not one.
The person providing the evidence doesn't get to choose the manner and form in which the evidence is provided.
Hello, I'm Ed O'Keefe, CBS News in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Michael Cohen returned to the witness stand today in New York, former President Donald Trump's fixer, facing a second day of cross-examination as week 5 of the criminal trial comes to a close.
This is finishing up. At some point, it'll be finished. Every single review, every legal scholar that I've been able to read said there's no case, there's no crime. It's a disgrace that it was allowed to happen.
Meanwhile, the White House denies Republican demands for audio of the president's 5 hours of interviews with special counsel Robert Hur, while the recordings are at the heart of a plan to hold the attorney general in contempt of Congress. We are following both of those stories tonight. Scott MacFarlane is standing by on Capitol Hill. But we start once again with Errol Barnett at the Trump criminal trial in Lower Manhattan. Errol, I hope they let you go home every so often, because I only see you at this post here over the last few weeks, and we appreciate your service. Cross-examination continued today for Mr. Cohen. How did the defense approach him on the stand this time?
Well, Ed, I appreciate that. I do get to sleep at home, but certainly,
Good.
Yes, I live here. The prosecution's goal today was to undermine Michael Cohen's credibility and to make the jury question his motivation for wanting to come forward with such damning testimony. He does have a crucial perspective. He links directly Donald Trump not only to the hush money payments, but to the repayments that are the core of the 34 felony charges against him. But how Todd Blanche, Donald Trump's lead defense attorney, tried to undo some of what Cohen laid out was done so through, in his own words. They played excerpts of his own podcast last year when the indictment against Trump was announced, where Cohen said he wanted to see Donald Trump behind bars getting fingerprinted, and in which he used an expletive to say he hopes that Trump ends up in prison. And he admitted to wanting revenge against Trump. They also, Todd Blanche, tried to question Cohen on the conversations he said he had with the president once he was elected, and then initiated the repayments to him. And they even played insults and referenced insults of Cohen calling Trump a, quote, orange-crusted ignoramus. The point was that the jury now heads into Friday and the weekend, this 3-day break, questioning the motivation of Cohen to come forward and testify. And we understand that cross-examination will continue Monday and could potentially wrap up then. The prosecution has said this is their last witness as far as they know. And we have the possibility, the defense has not yet decided, if Donald Trump himself will take the stand in his own defense. We've seen him step in front of cameras outside the courtroom to defend himself. But will he do so under oath? Highly unlikely, and his defense likely advising him not to do that. But this moment today, Ed, was about ending the week, making the jury doubt the credibility of Michael Cohen.
You said something there that might have caught the eye and the ear of the viewer, that there's no court tomorrow. Remind us why that is.
Well, Donald Trump said he needs time off to attend his son Barron's high school graduation. Interestingly enough, we understand that Trump will also be campaigning and fundraising, I believe, in Minnesota. So there is no court tomorrow. Things will resume on Monday. And the prosecution has said because they really don't have any additional witnesses and we're getting into the home stretch here, we're getting closer to the moment that the jury will deliberate after hearing closing arguments and decide on Donald Trump's fate. And all Donald Trump's defense team needs is one single juror out of the 12 to not believe beyond a reasonable doubt that he is guilty of committing the 34 felonies here. So really the defense's goal as they end this week was to throw sand into the testimony of Michael Cohen, because Cohen has testified that, yes, Trump wanted to hide the alleged sexual encounter, and he did so through those falsified records. And there's no sense that the defense plans to call really anyone at all, right, once they get the case? Yeah, there's been, conversations and the possibility that perhaps a technical witness may be called. Judge Merchant has said that, look, he's really limited on what he'll be able to say and testify. Maybe someone else who will plant more doubt on Michael Cohen, but we are getting the sense this is the home stretch. Anything could change when it comes to the beginning of next week, Ed, but as you know, this has moved on for weeks. The Trump campaign wants to get this behind them. Donald Trump himself wants to get beyond this. And if he testifies, of course, that could change the entire calculation.
All righty, Errol Barnett there for us in Lower Manhattan. Thank you, sir. We'll talk to you soon. Meanwhile, back here in Washington, a House panel has voted to advance a resolution holding Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. The House Judiciary Committee did so because they believe Garland's defying their request for audio recordings of the interviews of President Biden that were conducted as part of the case into his alleged mishandling of classified documents. You'll recall they didn't end up bringing a case. Scott McFarland is on Capitol Hill. Hello, sir. The Attorney General did something today, and you were there for this, that he rarely does. He showed up willingly in front of cameras to take questions and explain why he's joining the president and invoking executive privilege on these recordings. Let's take a listen.
The Justice Department is a fundamental institution of our democracy. People depend on us to ensure that our investigations and our prosecutions are conducted according to the facts and the law and without political influence. We have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure that the committees get responses to their legitimate requests. But this is not one. To the contrary, this is one that would harm our ability in the future to successfully pursue sensitive investigations.
So he's okay with legitimate requests, but doesn't think this is one of them. What are lawmakers on the Judiciary Committee saying in response to the Attorney General's argument?
Well, there are Republicans who say the Biden administration, if not the president himself, are scared. Scared by how that audio sounds if the public were to hear it. That's the argument they've been going with as they subpoenaed the audio, that there's something you can hear. The pauses, the inflections, the tone of voice that don't get communicated through the written word, the black ink on transcript. But the Department of Justice made an argument emphatically in their memo and through the Attorney General today that they have been voluminous with what they've given these House committees, including the verbatim transcript of the president. In fact, there were Democrats today poised to read the transcript aloud during the congressional hearings to emphasize you have what you need. And the White House counsel went a step further, Ed, saying there's a concern Republicans will chop and distort that audio and weaponize it, mechanize it for campaign purposes, and they think that's unacceptable. The Attorney General, speaking before cameras on this issue, underscores the significance. They recognize the significance of what they've done, recommending successfully the White House exert executive privilege.
Well, have you heard House Republicans say that they would or would not use the audio for political purposes, meaning in ads?
I think Republicans are making the argument that the audio is something that's in their purview, that they've subpoenaed it. It's a federal record that Congress has to do oversight of the Department of Justice and the special counsel, and that they are entitled to it. They certainly haven't predicted or forecast or foreshadowed any use for it on the campaign trail. But just take out a magic marker and circle May 16th on your calendar, because year to date, this has been the most peak 2024 day in Congress. The House Oversight Committee, as you know, Ed, was supposed to do the same thing this morning, approve a resolution to find the Attorney General in contempt of Congress, and they pushed it back till late tonight because members of that panel were in New York hanging out at the Trump trial and speaking outside to the microphones at the Trump trial. Just crystallizes so many different things about 2024 in one sequence of events. But the Oversight Committee poised to do the same thing the Judiciary Committee did, which is to approve this resolution, which may or may not, Ed, get to the House floor. I've heard from Democrats who say they don't have the votes on the Republican side to pass this thing or to even have a quorum in the U.S. House some days. It's not a fait accompli.
Yeah. Took till May 16th to get to peak 2024. I would have thought it had happened sooner.
So far.
Yeah, it'll happen again, undoubtedly. You are also following, real quick, a key vote in the House that would force the delivery of weapons to Israel. Remind us why Republicans wanted to take this vote today.
This is a messaging bill. This is going nowhere in the Senate, but Republicans believe this is a message worth sending for several different reasons. The bill that was voted on just before we came to air says that the Biden administration cannot withhold appropriated, approved weapons or money or aid for Israel. This is a messaging bill in several different ways. It's a message they want to send to the Biden administration, to the public at large, but it really jams up some Democrats. It's a tough vote for Democrats in endangered seats who have to find a way to continue to politically thread a needle here among mixed constituencies.
And it's the kind of bills on all sorts of topics that we're going to have over and over and over again in the House and to some extent in the Senate throughout the rest of the summer. Scott McFarland from the Justice Department to the Capitol, we thank you.
Republicans have and always will proudly back the blue.
House Republicans approve a trio of bills aimed at supporting law enforcement. Next on America Decides, we're joined by a Democrat and a Republican attempting to do even more to help the nation's policing. You're streaming America Decides. This is National Police Week, and two congressmen on opposite sides of the aisle are pushing new legislation aimed at helping law enforcement. Democratic Congressman Salud Carbajal and Republican Don Bacon today introduced the Filling Public Safety Vacancies Act. It's designed to reduce law enforcement staffing shortages and strengthen the vetting of new police recruits. Join us now. That is Congressman Don Bacon of Nebraska on the left and Congressman Salud Carbajal, Democrat of California, on the right. Both of them come from beautiful districts that I've had the privilege of visiting. Good to see you both, gentlemen. Thank you for being here. The House just overwhelmingly passed the Senate-approved Recruit and Retain Act, which is also designed to support law enforcement agencies' recruitment efforts, similar to what you guys have proposed. Why do you want your bill approved in addition to that piece of legislation? What's the big difference, perhaps?
Well, I think our bill does two things. One is it expands an existing grant program, COPS grant program, for hiring officers. And two, it provides a vetting system to ensure that we are providing background checks and mental health evaluations, which is not a requirement currently. And ultimately, what this legislation does, bipartisan, bicameral legislation, is it really addresses the crisis that we are seeing within law enforcement throughout the country, where there are major shortages of officers due to retirements and resignations for a number of reasons. And what this is doing is trying to address that very serious crisis that at the end of the day makes our communities less safe unless we're able to move this legislation forward. And I'm extremely happy to be moving this bill forward with my colleague, my Republican colleague, Don Bacon, who is a good friend and somebody I have teamed up with many a times to move forward common sense bipartisan legislation.
And Congressman Bacon, the background check requirement, adding that, is there some reason that is being called for specifically? Have there been examples of people slipping through the cracks, perhaps, that should have gone through some kind of background check before getting hired?
Well, as Salud said, and by the way, we traveled the world together. We've worked together on agriculture stuff, national security things, so it's a real privilege to be able to work with him. But since 2020, we've had a hard time recruiting and retaining police officers, particularly with the riots in the summer. And there was a lot of anger directed towards all police, though it was because of the behavior of a few in Minneapolis. And so what we're finding in some cases, because they can't find recruits, some of the standards have been lowered. And then you'll encounter some people who are going to enter the police force that probably shouldn't have been in there. So we're going to add $162 million to the program, the COPS program, to expand recruiting. But we also wanted to set a high bar for who we're recruiting, that they're the people that we want in this very important, critical role of protecting, our neighborhoods and our cities and our towns. We want to make sure that they have been screened first. So it was part of a give and take to be able to get this bill passed. That's why it's overwhelmingly supported in the Senate, and it's going to have the overwhelming support here because it's a balanced bill. It's a balanced approach. There have
been some other pieces of legislation passed regarding police, but yours is not. Do you get any sense you're going to get a vote on your proposal?
We sure hope so. I think we will because it's a common sense bill. And again, this will provide a solution to a crisis that everybody has come to understand. It raises our standards, and it increases trust between law enforcement and communities because of those elevated standards.
So I represent Omaha, and we have 12 smaller towns and cities other than Omaha. Every single one right now is grappling to fill the numbers that are needed to provide police in our streets. So this is I say a looming crisis for our country that we got to fix.
And just to be clear, this money could be used to hire new officers, but also just to give pay raises to existing ones, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Real quick, I wanted to have you guys listen to something that House Republicans were saying yesterday, attacking the president and other Democrats' record on crime. Just take a listen to this.
Under Joe Biden and far-left failed leadership, the safety of America's law enforcement has been sacrificed for the sake of the Democrats' pro-criminal agenda. Lawless liberals handicap our police from doing their jobs with failed bail reform, like my home state in New York, and pro-criminal policies that appease the far-left Democrats' defund the police agenda.
That was Elise Stefanik of House Republican leadership. I mean, what do you two make of?
Let me tell you.
Well, go ahead.
Well, let me tell you, here in Washington, gridlock and partisanship is the hallmark here. And what Representative Bacon and I are doing is not focusing on pointing fingers. We're focusing on solutions. We're focusing on governing, focusing on working collaboratively, a Republican and a Democrat, to find solutions, not focus on the rhetoric, but really focus on getting things done. And that's what this bill will do on addressing a real challenge within our law enforcement.
But doesn't that kind of
finger pointing?
Doesn't that kind of rhetoric, though, dissuade a lot of your Democratic colleagues of working with Republicans to get this kind of stuff done?
Well, I think we should be careful about painting a broad brush everybody in a party because of the actions of one or two. And so I'm always very careful not to say all Democrats. I may point out an individual that I disagree on this policy or that policy. I may disagree with Joe Biden on some policies. I try not to blame, my friend here, Salud, for the behavior of the New York mayor or what goes on in Chicago mayor. So I just think it's better to talk about individuals and individual policies. So that's not the kind of rhetoric that I participate in.
And that's
real quick,
why we're here.
Yeah, and we're glad you're both here. And Congressman Bacon, real quick, you survived a Republican primary this week. Your district is the swing district in Nebraska, and your state awards electoral college votes by congressional district. How competitive is your district this November? How much attention are you anticipating from the Biden and Trump campaigns there?
Well, I believe it'll be very competitive. It's an R+1 district, so if all things are equal, I should win by 1 point, 50.5 to 49.5. In 2020, President Biden won it by 7 points, and I won it by 5. So it's about a 12-point spread there. Our district will do split balloting, but in the end, our district is a conservative center-right district, but it wants someone that's diplomatic, that works with other people, tries to find consensus. They want someone that's going to govern and not be a flamethrower, a name caller. And so I feel like I have fit in well in this district. Now, I think 4 years ago, a lot of folks were trying to look for something new. They thought Joe Biden was going to be running more as a moderate, more of a steady hand. Now he has a 4-year record as well. So I think this district's up for grabs in the presidential level, and I hope I've done a good job where I can nail down this district, this election. Right now, my polling shows me 5 points up. That's not bad after sort of a nasty primary. And the National Democrats put in $1.6 million in the primary to try to weaken me in the primary. And I think despite that, my numbers have held pretty well, so I feel confident.
Well, we will see. Congressman Don Bacon from Nebraska, representing the great city of Omaha. Congressman Salud Carbajal of California, representing the beautiful city of San Luis Obispo and its surrounding communities. That is a beautiful part of California to visit. Thank you both for being here. Good luck with your bill.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Just by the way, we have visited each other's districts in a bipartisan way in the past, and I think that reflects our continued work together on this bill.
Good, good. Well, more of that then. Thank you both for being here. Take care.
There's no crime. The crime is that they're doing this case.
Former President Donald Trump stays on message at his New York criminal trial as his former fixer spends a third day on the witness stand. More on the evolution of Michael Cohen next here on America Decides. Welcome back. Former President Donald Trump and his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, have a bit of a history. Cohen, you'll recall, worked as Trump's self-described fixer for years. Now the Trump ally turned antagonist is a key witness in the former president's New York criminal trial. Robert Costa joins us again from Lower Manhattan. As we watched Cohen on the stand over the last several days, as someone who knows him and his history with the former president, talk a little bit about this transformation from loyal fixer to a guy who, in essence, is trying to in essence, help prosecutors send the former president to jail.
And part of that transformation, Ed, is about moving from being a combative public personality and real critic of former President Trump to being someone who, on the witness stand today and in recent days, has been relatively calm, even muted, answering questions in a terse way. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes. As he dealt with questions from Todd Blanche, the lead attorney for former President Trump. For Cohen, this effort is clearly about underscoring his own credibility with the jury watching intently. I was inside the courthouse today watching all of the proceedings, and it's evident that we're moving toward the end of this trial. Michael Cohen, the crucial witness, and he is ending this process, a process that has taken him from being Donald Trump's fixer to being Donald Trump's critic to facing jail time for his role in a federal case to lying to Congress to having a podcast. All of that ends and culminates here with this calm, terse testimony this week. Whether or not the jury convicts Trump, obviously still very much TBD, but Michael Cohen isn't necessarily the Michael Cohen you have come to see in his public role in the past couple of years.
And do we get a sense that he trained in order to be that restrained, or that he may, once this is all over, unspool again and share his real thoughts on how this all went over the last few days?
He's always going to be Michael Cohen, and in some exchanges today with Todd Blanche, former President Trump's lead attorney, there was clearly some tension, and Cohen was frustrated at times with the way Blanche was phrasing questions and going through the evidence. I wouldn't use trained as a word, but I've spoken to Cohen several times over the last few years about getting ready for this testimony, and he just kept telling me whenever it came down to a tension point, he would always refer to the documents, and he has followed through largely with that plan with this testimony. Keeps coming back to phone records, checks signed by Trump, the audio he recorded of a conversation with Trump. All of this documentation, that's really at the forefront of Michael Cohen's testimony, more than any kind of story or anecdote he's revealing on the stand.
As the kids might say, he has the receipts to back it all up, yeah. Look, as we watch this trial wind down, and now knowing that the other federal cases very well may not play out as anticipated this summer, do we have some sense of how the Trump campaign's planning to fill the calendar between the end of this trial, say, and the convention in July?
You are going to see more rallies from Trump, and he has a vice presidential pick to make. He's also going to be spending some time with debate prep. Now, Trump in 2016 and 2020 is not someone who has debate prep sessions in a very organized way, but he will be preparing for the debates, I'm told, by several of his allies ahead of that first exchange with President Biden. And he wants to keep stoking his support, especially in states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, that industrial battleground in the Midwest and upper Midwest, where he believes, and his campaign believes, President Biden's support is soft. You've spent a lot of time covering the Biden campaign in those respective areas. And look for him to also spend some time in Georgia, Arizona, looking to stoke the Republican vote in those respective states.
So we may actually get some semblance of a traditional campaign season. We'll see, at least in terms of travel.
A little bit for the late spring and summer.
Yeah. All right. Robert Costa there in Lower Manhattan, outside criminal court. Thank you as always, sir. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Nikki Haley, remember her? Well, she's continuing to draw a notable number of votes in Republican primaries, even though she's no longer running. Can former President Trump win over her supporters, or might Biden bank away her votes? Well, we've got two political pros joining us to ponder that next, as you're streaming America Decides. I think it's fair to say there was no love lost between Donald Trump and Nikki Haley during the Republican primary. And even though she's been out of the race now for about 2 months, it's increasingly clear some of her supporters just aren't quite ready yet for the party to unite. The former ambassador to the United Nations, look at this, racked up 20% of the vote in Maryland's Republican primary earlier this week. Out in Nebraska on Tuesday night, she brought in almost 18% of the primary vote. The former president, though, doesn't seem fazed about her support.
Those voters are all coming to me, and you may have a lot of Democrats in there because they have a very tricky little system, but those voters are coming to me.
We are joined now by Olivia Perez-Cubas and Chuck Rocha. Olivia is a Republican strategist and served as a spokeswoman for Nikki Haley's presidential campaign. Chuck, the only man allowed to wear headgear on television, is a Democratic strategist who served as a senior advisor to Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign and advises other Democrats on the ballot this year. They're all coming to me, he claims. Based on what you saw in your research of the Haley voter when you were working for her campaign, is that true? Are they all going to him?
I think that remains to be seen. I think you just listed Maryland. Last week we saw Indiana. Nikki is still racking up a significant chunk of votes. And look, we can all do math. It's not the majority here, but it's significant enough. And I think that it spells out a real problem for both Trump and Biden, to be honest, because whichever way these voters go in such a close election come November will be whichever way the election goes.
I mean, we've seen in a few states, six-figure sums of Republican vote go for her, even after she dropped out. That doesn't mean that six-figure sum is all going to vote for Joe Biden, but there's a bigger risk that that six-figure sum stays home when Donald Trump's on the ballot, right?
Yeah,
and that's part of the concern.
I think the concern is no one knows what they're going to do.
Right.
And it's funny because, you know, her speech when she suspended her campaign, she said, now it's up to you to earn the votes of my supporters. And I think her words ring truer today as they did then. Nothing's changed.
Yeah.
Trump needs to earn their vote and Biden needs to earn their vote.
And has the president done anything yet explicitly to reach out to them?
I think he's starting to now. I think what you haven't mentioned, what we saw in the last election, and the reason why Donald Trump likes to say that the election was stolen, even though they voted for other Republicans but not him, is exactly that. I think these voters, not all of them, but history would tell us they go there. They're primary voters. They like to vote. They're showing up in a primary. They're for sure going to show up in the general. And I think they vote, but they skip that line of the ticket. That's what I think is the big impact they could have on this election when the margins are so narrow. They wanted anybody but Donald Trump. Secretary was a good vote for them at the time, and I think that they're still so angry about it. Not all of them, but I think enough of them to affect this election will just skip that line.
Do we know what she's going to talk about when she's here in town next week?
I don't know what she's going to talk about. She is, I think, you know, she's back in the arena in some sense. I think it's important that her voice be in the conversation. I'm encouraged that she is giving a speech because we are seeing this is a very sensitive time for America, particularly within the Republican Party. There's a growing divide about America's role in the world, about whether we should retreat or whether we should remain strong on the world stage. Nikki has been very vocal about American leadership, peace through strength, and I think it's important that she continue to be vocal on that front.
The Vice President, Kamala Harris, has accepted an invitation from CBS News to participate in a vice presidential debate on either Tuesday, July 23rd or Tuesday, August 13th. We're waiting to hear from the Trump campaign about whether they would accept that invitation or not, but it has been extended to them. When you think about the universe of potential Trump running mates, a list that includes everyone from Nikki Haley, even though then he sort of rejected that idea, to Tim Scott, to Kristi Noem, to Elise Stefanik, to Doug Burgum. Among those, who would you say might be the best equipped to debate the vice president?
Well, I think the list of people not under consideration is shorter than the list of people under consideration. I have no idea who Trump is going to pick. I think Trump is the only one who knows who he's going to pick. I could see it being Burgum, Ben Carson. Your guess is as good as mine.
Look, I want to eliminate folks maybe who's killed their dogs in a grapple pit, and we'll leave them over here to the side.
So that's one.
That's one. But then you put the people around her who are just as crazy here in Congress, who went up to New York this week to sit and have his back. There's a whole basket of those folks there that I think would be crazy to be on a debate stage that she don't want no part of, or we don't either, because you can't control that. I've done debate prep in a presidential campaign, and I know that you want to control what you think is going to happen. And when you got a crazy person there, you can't control that. So I think the one that's the most vulnerable, or the one that's in good shape, would be like a U.S. senator, like a Marco Rubio, or somebody of that who knows policy, who has a history, who they could actually have a debate about that. Mm-hmm. I think that would be the most interesting.
It would be interesting to see how they prepare her in the meantime. Real quick, President's going to Georgia for 2 days, essentially, and then up to Detroit for a series of events designed to reach black voters, and especially black men to some extent. How serious an issue is that in both of those states, Georgia?
The margins are going to be so small, Ed. You've talked about that. We've talked about it in Iowa and other places. It's so little that every one of these things matter a whole lot, because he can't lose 3 or 4%. He may could lose 1%, but you start losing 3 or 4 or 5% of the black vote, this thing's already over.
Especially in those battleground states.
Absolutely.
See? Haley voters, black voters, every voter counts in these tighter elections. Olivia Perez-Cubas, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Chuck Rocha, always good to see you. Thank you both for being here. One note from overseas, China is renewing its call for a political end to the war in Ukraine. It comes as Russian President Vladimir Putin is in Beijing for a 2-day state visit to China. The meeting with Chinese leader Xi Jinping is the third in just over a year. We're already more than 2 years past Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with no end in sight. Still to come, some say this summer's Democratic convention could look a lot like it did in 1968. Will anti-war protesters cause problems in the Windy City? Take a deep dive next on America Decides. A coalition of pro-Palestinian activists are vowing to march during the Democratic National Convention without a permit. The Chicago Coalition for Justice in Palestine dropped their plans to seek a permit after Chicago police dismantled a student encampment at DePaul University just today. This group says tens of thousands of protesters are planning to march during the Democratic National Convention in August, which is an interesting setup for our next guest, Peter Hamby of Puck. It's an email news service. That's one way to put it, at least, and it's certainly worth your time if you haven't checked it out. It's good to see you, Peter, longtime political reporter and observer of essentially the way we pick presidents. And part of the reason why we wanted to talk to you is because earlier this month you wrote an article essentially pushing back against this growing speculation or crutch, I think, of a lot of people in our business, that we are on the verge potentially of a repeat of the 1968 DNC protests at a convention in Chicago. This development today is one thing, but expand on why it is you think that is not necessarily something to subscribe to.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ed, by the way. Good to see you. You and I have been to several conventions together at this point.
Yeah.
It is pretty easy to make these analogies, especially in the Trump era with social media. We in the press, people online, activists, we tend to think the most important, dramatic, tumultuous times in history are happening right now. But I just think the comparisons to 1968 are kind of facile. Look, there were so many things going on in the country at that moment back in 1968. And that convention, quite frankly, is misremembered by a lot of people. For example, there's a cliche that it was a contested convention. It was not. Hubert Humphrey, while not super popular with all of the party, won on the first ballot. So the idea that there's going to be protests and violence in the streets is kind of seeped out there in some headlines and analysis. I don't want to diminish the fact or the prospect that there will be legitimate protests about Gaza and other issues in the streets of Chicago. But back then, the Vietnam War was going on. In 1968, there were over 500,000 Americans deployed in Vietnam. 17,000 Americans were killed in Vietnam at that very year. You also had the civil rights movement going on. Bobby Kennedy had been assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. The war overseas and the civil rights movement were very personal issues to people. They were being discussed every single day. People's sons, brothers, cousins, et cetera, were being killed. That's not what's happening today. And the other note, and we can get into this a little bit, and I've been writing about this for Puck a lot, is that while there probably will be protesters in Chicago, some of those campus protests, they might migrate to Chicago this summer. It's not the number one issue for Gen Z. It's not. It's something that stresses them out. It's something they care about. But as you know, covering the White House, the economy, prices, inflation, for Gen Z in particular, the cost of housing and rent, those are the most salient issues for young voters right now. So this group that's planning on protesting, they will be out there in the streets, permit or not. There will be cameras following them around. If there are no cameras following them around, they will film their own content and put it on social media for all to see. The comparison, though, doesn't really work one-to-one, at least in my opinion.
No, and I think you're right. And I've been struck by how many colleagues have sort of pointed out the fact that you don't have tens of thousands of Americans dead. You don't have hundreds of thousands deployed. You don't have major political assassinations. It's not a worthy comparison. While we have you, part of why I like reading Puck is because you guys are brilliant reporters. y'all have a way of sort of standing there off to the side and going, this is a little absurd or different than how we've done it in the past. You must have thoughts on this sudden plan to have the two candidates debate in a very conventional way after so many years of conversation about doing it differently or having different people moderate these exchanges. What do you make of the plan that's come together so quickly?
I mean, first of all, and my colleague Dylan Byers, who you know has reported some of this out, congrats to CNN, congrats to ABC News, hopefully congrats to CBS if this vice presidential debate comes through once Donald Trump picks his running mate. I find it interesting because for a variety of reasons, I would love to be a fly on the wall between those behind-the-scenes conversations between the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign, because outwardly, as we know, the candidates are trolling each other and have been about debating. This really kind of eviscerates the Commission on Presidential Debates, which has run this process going back to the 80s. They're standing over there saying, this probably won't work out. We know how to negotiate the nitty-gritty details, the moderators, who controls the microphone, whether there's going to be audiences in the room. But I don't see either candidate, after doing these first two debates, maybe a third, consenting to doing even more debates in the fall. I mean, it's a win for both campaigns in a sense. Obviously, you guys in Washington have been talking about this a lot. Biden needs to debate. But look, the debates need to happen before early voting starts. The nature of voting has changed. And look, if both candidates mess up, if one of them does, they have some time to recover. They were just very high stakes in the past happening in September and October. They are still very high stakes, but I think both campaigns are managing it well.
All right. Well, Peter Hamby, come back and talk to us again. If you ever leave gorgeous Los Angeles, especially, we'd love to see you here in Washington, or we'll see you in Milwaukee or Chicago along the way. He's with Puck News. He does some podcasting as well. He knows what he's talking about. Peter, thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it.
She's a rising star in Texas and outspoken about her struggle with depression. Next, Judge Lina Hidalgo on why you don't have to struggle alone. You're streaming America Decides.
I want anyone who's listening to this, that sees this, if you are suffering from depression, please get help. Please get help, because it works.
The goal is for folks to see it as no different than a politician who suffers from high blood pressure, which I don't have, or has had a heart attack.
Pennsylvania Senator John Fetterman and Harris County, Texas Judge Lina Idalgo are two of the most outspoken elected officials telling Americans it's okay not to be okay. They've both taken leaves of absence for their mental health struggles. Idalgo runs Harris County, which encompasses Houston. She's considered a big star in Texas Democratic Party politics with a potentially bigger political future. But her decision to seek treatment last year was seen as a big political risk. You heard her there moments ago when we spoke last October, her first interview after going back to work. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and a new poll from Gallup finds 80% of American adults believe the number of mental health issues has increased in the United States over the last 5 years. And Judge Lina Hidalgo joins us now here in Washington. It's good to see you again.
Likewise.
It's obviously been a few months since we met down in Houston. I suppose the first thing worth knowing is, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing fabulous. It's about to be a year since I checked myself into an inpatient mental health facility in Cincinnati, Ohio. And when I chatted with you, it was like my second day back at work. Yeah. I was so excited. I was so happy. And obviously since then, I've faced all kinds of challenges. But the upside of it is I'm handling everything so much better. And I'm just absolutely thrilled. And I can't wait to share more with you.
I imagine, or I wonder, have you heard much from constituents or people across the country about your decision to do this and then be so public about it? And what's that reaction been like?
I've heard from people a lot. Pretty much everywhere I go in my community, every time really, at least one person stops me to share their struggles, to thank me for being open about this. And I know that just sharing it means so much. One of the things that Senator Fetterman and I had in common when we met was how important our support systems were to us seeking care and getting better. For me, my boyfriend, for him, his kids, his wife. And so what I am now trying to share with people is, really take care of yourself. And if you're not the one suffering from a mental illness, educate yourself so that you can identify that in your loved ones, and your friends, and your kids. That's really important.
I remember one of the most stark things you suggested in our conversation was, if you ever have somebody say to you, "Oh, I just want to kill myself," the answer is not, "Oh, it's okay, don't worry about it, go take a walk, open a door, have a drink." It's what?
Go seek help, go seek treatment.
Right.
And so we come from a place of love and support when we say, oh, just be positive, look at all the great things going on in your life. My life was going great also. Of course, so many political challenges and disasters in Houston. We just had a terrible flood, and but it's part of the job. Everybody has challenges. And so many people just would tell me all the great things that were happening, and I didn't even know that inpatient mental health treatment was something that somebody could seek who didn't need to be in a in a white room with a bed and no tie-on points.
Right. You had said to me when we met last fall that you had hoped to meet with Senator Fetterman. You finally did last week here in Washington.
That's right.
How'd it go?
It went great. We are quite different. So I knew he was tall, but to see him in person, I'm 5'2" on a good day. And so he's almost 2 feet taller than me. He has children. I've got a cat. I'm just now getting married. Different stages of our careers. But there was also a lot in common. And part of what we talked about is how much precipitating events sent us to treatment, but also the fact that we ultimately, discovering that we had depression, sharing it with other people is just so vital, and of course the shame that people try to put on you when you seek mental health treatment.
I'm curious, and you don't have to give names, I wouldn't want them, but have you heard from anyone else in public office?
Yes.
Who says, I may want to do what you did?
I have heard from people. I'm trying to sort of mentor, coach some of my colleagues who have reached out to me about that. And share resources with them. But the most striking thing I've heard, Ed, is I started asking my close friends, colleagues from locally and around the country, and I said, how do you cope? How do you do this without seeking mental health treatment? And I had several of them say, I drink. And so that's the thing, is there has to be a way to cope, whatever the challenges in your life. And the point is to be compassionate with yourself the way you are compassionate with others. And why is it that I had to learn this in 8 weeks in Cincinnati? Well, some people have that resiliency genetically, and some people, they grow up not knowing. Some parents teach it, some parents just don't know. Mine didn't. Doesn't mean they're bad parents, it just means I really want to share with people, learn, if not for you, for your kids, so they can have these tools to handle things so much better.
Harris County Judge Lena Idalgo, good to see you again.
Likewise.
Thank you for sharing some of your story, and we should remind people, if you or someone you know is struggling, call or text 988 or chat 988 lifeline.org. Tomorrow marks the 70th anniversary of the Brown versus Board of Education decision, the landmark Supreme Court case declaring segregation in America's public schools to be unconstitutional. Today at the White House, the original plaintiffs of the case and their families met with President Biden. Cheryl Brown Henderson is the daughter of plaintiff Oliver Brown and spoke about the significance of the ruling.
The message I always want to send is that this Supreme Court decision, pivoting on the 14th Amendment, is something that impacted every single citizen of this country, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender.
That does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.